I love this. It's a recruiting flip, and we haven't done this in a while. But, folks, if you were worried about Miami landing wide receivers, take a deep breath and say it with me. Joshua Moore, welcome to the U.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I noticed people in the chat already realized that I've left town. I've gone on a trip, and it's like magic every single time. Every single time I leave the comforts of my home, Miami always lands a player. And this one is a flip from the Florida Gators. So you flip a player from an in-state rival at a position of need in this recruiting class. It makes it extra sweet. So thank you so much for tuning in. We're live right now, so make sure you hit that thumbs up button. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And thank you so much for making us your first or second listen today. I am Alex Dono, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, co-host of Locked On ACC. Locked On Canes, we are available free and we're daily. Wherever you get your podcast, free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So since the Miami Hurricanes have just flipped four-star wide receiver Joshua Moore, he flips from the Florida Gators to the Miami Hurricanes. It just happened tonight. We had to put out the bat signal to bring in our recruiting overlord, Brian Smith, who, of course, has covered West Broward. He's covered Josh Moore. He actually sent me the photo he took of Josh Moore to use for the episode cover on this one. So, Brian, first and foremost, are you surprised that this flip happened? Because ever since Miami beat Florida head-to-head, seems like Josh, he was on campus at Miami a couple days later. It seemed to be trending in this direction.
No offense to Florida, but why would you pick that program? It's a sinking ship. So, no, I am not surprised at all. They're better than they were, but, that staff's in trouble. Everybody wants to play for a stable coaching situation. Yeah, not surprised at all.
All right, so let's talk about Josh Moore, the player, because, first of all, very productive South Floridian, and he's got that size that Miami fans crave at that position. Miami's, of course, they've done a really good job in recent cycles, landing, a lot of slot type body types and more. 6'4", 205 pounds is his listing on 247sports.com. What can Miami fans expect from the West Broward standout?
He's faster than most kids his size. He reminds me, ironically, quite a bit of Hakeem Williams in terms of body type and style. He'll go by you, even though he's 6'3" and 200-plus pounds. But he's also a guy that he can run comebacks, curls, and basic routes like that, run over a guy or run around a guy. He's got some versatility to his game already, just like most kids, needs to clean up a little things with how he changes direction and all that. That's just footwork stuff you get better with. If he catches the ball away from his body, he'll make contested catches. And it doesn't matter what part of the field. He's not just a one-dimensional guy. Does he play right away with Miami's depth chart? That might be asking a little bit. But by his sophomore year, he'll be a guy that could really make some noise. I just can't stress this enough. Big-bodied receivers like Joshua are rare. Forget what their ranking is. And just know this is a numbers game. There are very few guys that have Josh's size that can run like him. So he's worth more than what his recruiting value is. You got to have those boundary receivers. If you don't, you're not going to win the elite games.
I don't know what the answer is to this question. Maybe you do, or if there even is a definitive answer, but we get this question from Edwin Rivera, who's, sorry, that's not the question. A question from Matthew Catalina, who says, who's better, Josh Moore or Dallas Wilson?
Dallas Wilson. Dallas is more polished. Same player, he's just more polished. Like he's played at Tampa Tech. They got a receiver coach there who's put multiple guys in the NFL. Joshua has a chance to be just as good, if not better, but he's just not as polished. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same guy. Joshua's slightly heavier, but they can both really run and change directions at 6'3". That never goes out of style, brother.
And just so Edwin knows, I'm not ducking your question. I'm not, because we're going to talk about that a little bit before this episode is done. We got the recruiting overlord with us, and so All right. So when I said at the top, some Miami fans were freaking out a little bit about wide receiver recruiting because, Miami recently lost Malachi Tony to a decommit. The only receiver Miami currently had committed before this Joshua Moore flip is Dalen Upshaw, who I hear is still trending pretty solidly to Miami. But you actually, Brian, you might know this better than me because you cover Auburn recruiting so closely. What's been the buzz up there? Because I know he's taken a lot of visits to Auburn. They're working for a flip of Dalen Upshaw.
Well, that's the question. Like, I know Dalen really well, and I saw him at an Auburn game recently and talked to him on the sideline. I don't know if they're pushing for him or not, because early on they were not. He'd have committed there if they'd have taken his commitment early, like February, something like that. I don't know what that situation is now because Auburn sucks. They are bad. And hey, man, I go to their games. They find ways to lose. It's not a matter of talent. They find ways to lose. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
They may not win an SEC game. They're that bad. But he lives right down the road. He goes to the same high school Cam Coleman did, so he's 45 minutes from campus, be closer to all his family and stuff. And this area is really tight with family. So maybe, but I don't know if Auburn's pushing. And look, which one's got more stability in the program? It's the same thing as with Joshua Moore leaving UF to go to Miami. It's not that hard. So I'm not so certain. They got to show something, or I don't think Dalen would take it. That's just my opinion. I haven't asked him recently, but I'd be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, the latest, I know Gabby Arudi at Inside the U had some intel on that recently. And of course, nobody really knows until, December, right? But he mentioned something about how folks still feel pretty confident about, Dalen to the U. But obviously, certainly you follow the visits. You mentioned, in that community, he's been to some Auburn games and stuff like that. So it's been a situation to monitor. But, we'll talk about what Miami has and what Miami has just gotten in this verbal commitment from Joshua Moore. What this does for Miami's recruiting ranking now. He becomes Miami's 22nd verbal commit in this cycle. And who might be next? Because I'll tell you, folks, between now and National Signing Day in December, Miami is only shooting for the stars. They're only fishing for whales right now. They're not, looking to add 3-star guys. They're looking for potential big flips down the road. So you guys want to keep it locked right here. We got the recruiting overlord Brian Smith with us, and we're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. You want to keep it locked. And friends, I already know you're keeping it locked to Roy, and we're so pleased this week to name Xavier Restrepo. I always say his name wrong, by the way. It's Xavier Restrepo. I need to learn how to say the man's name because he's one of the best players on the team, and he is our player of the week. And guys, the Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes. Unlike collectives where you make a donation to a general fund, Roy lets you choose the specific athlete you want to support. You back the players you care about, and in return, get exclusive content after the season, like personal videos and updates. And the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create the content, you get your money back. So we have chosen Xavier Restrepo, another tremendous game. He had 166 receiving yards, including that 77-yarder. He is so reliable, and he's about to become Miami's all-time leading receiver. So yeah, today we have contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy. We want you to join us by making a payment of as little as $10. When enough of us contribute, it's not just about the dollars, it's about the message we send to Xavier Restrepo together. Our collective support helps keep him connected to our school. Plus, Roy is doing their part to bring fans closer to their schools with an exciting giveaway. Roy is giving one lucky fan 2 tickets to any game of their choice in November. Here's how to enter. Just download Roy in the App Store or Google Play. Use code LOCKEDON when signing up, and you're entered. If you're already on Roy, make a payment to any athlete's campaign, and you'll also be automatically entered. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for official rules. Download Roy and try it out. There's no subscription, no recurring fees, and for as little as $10, you can get in the NIL game. Roy, support the players, change the game. And we're also brought to you on this awesome episode of Locked On Canes, a flip edition. We're brought to you by the great folks at FanDuel. Yeah, my friends, we've been winning money all season long. And NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making this emergency episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we have the recruiting overlord, Brian Smith, with us. So, Brian, Miami has the 12th rated class of 2025, according to 247sports.com. The Hurricanes have just added Joshua Moore, 4-star wide receiver, flips from Florida to Miami. I don't know how much more movement there's going to be, Brian. We'll talk about that. But do you think Miami's going to end up with a top 10 class or maybe even top 5 this year?
To get top 5, they'd have to surprise us with somebody, but Mario seems to do that every year, so I wouldn't be shocked. The bigger question is, who is it going to be that they flip? They are really good at getting the flip towards the end, and I just think it's fun to follow. I know they're not going to give up on Dallas Wilson or Jamie French or any of those kinds of players. And obviously, they always want D linemen. There's a certain young man in Georgia they're going to recruit until he tells them no. So I'm just curious which kids are going to show up like one more time for a game. Follow the visits. We've talked about this 100 times on this show. Follow the visits. And then the in-home visits like Florida State, Miami, they all recruit the same kids. You can, when they're not going to visit these other schools, even if they're not at Miami, that's another thing to watch. Yeah. Where are they going, if anywhere? So I think Florida State their class is in the wrong direction. I think Florida's is too. Miami might be the beneficiary there. There could be players from each of those classes still that they pick up, and they could get somebody else too, because Miami's a top 10 team. Anything is possible.
Yeah, and something I want to ask you about how Miami verbal commits like Luke Nickel, class of 2025 quarterback, who seems to be contending for a player of the year type season, and Darian Coleman, 2026 quarterback at Jones in Orlando. His team is undefeated, because one of the things that I've seen, some of the fans who root for either the 1-5 team up the road or Gators fans will talk about, well, how's Miami going to be recruiting receivers when they're not going to play with Cam Ward? That the guys they're recruiting, they're not going to play with Cam Ward next year. He's off to the NFL. But Brian, you can speak to the type of players Miami has verbally committed, because I know Luke Nickel incredibly well, and Darian Coleman as well.
Yeah, both of those guys are A, good people, and B, they're good quarterbacks. Both of them are really accurate, and they're gamers. Luke is why they won a state title in Georgia last year at the highest classification. He caught fire. There's nowhere to hide in Georgia, brother. It's #1 state in the country per capita for sending players in the NFL. Okay, and he won state title in 7A, so that kind of speaks to itself. Coleman this year, and I've seen him play, for a couple of years. He's a kid I knew in 9th grade. His accuracy is uncanny, and he can make guys miss in the open field. He can run RPO, do all those things. Back-to-back, Miami's in pretty good shape there. Plus, they got Emory on campus. I don't know what they'll do after this year, but, I mean, this next season's the one iffy. But after that, they're just going to have high school kids. They won't need to go to the portal anymore. So they should be in a pretty good spot. I'm not worried about Miami at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and you alluded to this earlier. Whoever Miami's next verbal commit is, class of 2025 anyway, because obviously the 2026s have started dropping as well. But the next class of 2025 recruit would probably be a flip. I mean, most of the players Miami seems to be still after are probably flips. And you mentioned a couple of the names. They haven't given up on Dallas Wilson. They certainly haven't given up on Ben Hanks Jr., who's another Florida commit, but he's a legacy, so it's maybe a little bit tougher for guys like Hanks and Vernell Brown since they're legacies. But you also you alluded to Elijah Griffin, who's the top defensive lineman in the class. Another one that has been written about and talked about a little bit today is Hayden Lowe, who's currently committed to USC, but Miami has not given up. I think he's going to be coming down for the Florida State game. And I know, we've talked about this before. It can be tough sometimes. USC tends to sometimes lose commit shortly before signing day. I know Miami has not given up there. And Lowe, in a story I read by Gabby at 24/7, he mentioned that Lowe and his family feel pretty confident that Jason Taylor is going to be at Miami for a long time, which makes me feel good. But in saying that, he thinks that that's a coach that could develop him for his entire time at Miami if he comes. I mean, has there been any movement you've seen on the Hayden Lowe front?
Well, two things. This relates to anybody with SC. The recent intel is that their administration is not doing the right things with NIL and all this stuff, and that's why
Yeah,
they had some
heard that.
problems.
And I'm not trying to make
Thanks.
this political, but they get taxed like the NIL there gets
Oh, yeah,
taxed in a way that it doesn't get taxed in Florida.
Or anywhere else, by that matter.
Yes.
They're failing in recruiting linemen in general. They did finally get a real defense coordinator at SC. Lynn is really good.
Yeah.
But they're still not getting the players. That's not a good sign. And they're 5-7 in their last 12 games. I don't know if people know that, but how does that happen at USC? It's not a very hard gig, brother.
Yeah, it's not. It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't. If he's visiting, it's possible. And is USC a defensive or offensive team, Alex? What do you think?
An offensive team. Yeah.
I mean, Miami's much more balanced, and you have a Hall of Famer coaching you if you go to Miami. The only question here is, can he handle, he's going across the country. That's why the visit for this one is especially important. Let's see how that goes. But, I mean, we've both been around Jason, press conference and stuff. He's a pretty cool guy. He doesn't, he doesn't walk around like I'm all that because I got the gold jacket. I think he relates to kids well, and he's a good recruiter. I think Miami's got a pretty good chance to flip this one. He's a good player. That's a kid, you red shirt, and then like his second year is going to play. So this is what Miami's supposed to be. They're supposed to be in these kind of battles. I mean, this would be a very welcome addition to the Canes.
No doubt. And Brian Smith is always a welcome addition to the show. He's the recruiting overlord in these parts. Make sure you follow him on X at FBScout_Florida. Brian, thank you so much for all the great recruiting intel, including the newest Miami Hurricanes verbal commit, Joshua Moore. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, sir.
And thanks to everyone for joining us, man. If you're watching us live, 7:53 p.m. Eastern time, smash that like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening to the audio version, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you get your pods. And we will talk to you guys again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.